Welcome to the CERAWeek podcast, where the world's energy leaders and innovators share insights on the future of energy, technology, and climate. I am Atul Arya, Chief Energy Strategist at S&P Global. In each episode, we dive into the critical issues and bold ideas shaping our energy future. So let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to CERAWeek podcast. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome Uwem Ukpong, Vice President for Industries at Amazon Web Services. Uwem, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's get started, Uwem. Can you just maybe briefly tell us about your role and responsibilities within AWS? It's a very large organization.
Yes, as VP for Industries at AWS, my role is really focused on working with customers across virtually every sector. So if you think of the sectors of energy and utilities, automotive, manufacturing, financial services, healthcare and life sciences, media, entertainment, games and sports, telecommunications, retail, CPG. So quite a handful and quite a lot of customers who are seeking to digitally transform their businesses. And what my team at AWS are involved in are working with these customers, working backwards from their problems and seeing how we help them transform. Now, I do have other responsibilities within AWS. I have an international expansion role, which is responsible for deciding where we invest and build new data centers internationally for AWS. So that's one piece. And the third pillar that I'm also responsible for is sovereign cloud, which has garnered a lot of attention lately across the world.
Exactly. And we were together in Davos where it was a big point of discussion, the whole data center, sovereign cloud. Great set of responsibilities. Let's narrow it down to the data centers, which you said is part of your expansion and growth. So give our audience a brief overview of the data center footprint for AWS within the US and more broadly around the world.
Yeah, so if you think about our footprint, you will hear us use the expression regions and availability zones. So we do have 39 regions and 123 availability zones. And let me explain. Consider each infrastructure region as a cluster of 3 availability zones. And each availability zone will have 3 to 5 data centers in it. When I say we have an infrastructure region in Frankfurt, then you can think of it as anywhere from 9 to 15 data centers located in that cluster of 3 availability zones. So 39 infrastructure regions, 123 availability zones scattered globally across the world. And in 2026, we will be launching 2 new infrastructure regions, one in Saudi Arabia and another one in Chile. And we continue to evaluate and look at the ability to grow and bring in other regions. Now, Atul, something I want to stress here about the infrastructure regions is not just about the size of the number, it's about efficiency in those infrastructure regions. How is our power evolving, power utilization effectiveness or power use effectiveness in those regions? These are things that are very important for us. And right now, we have a PUE of about 1.15 as measured in 2024. Which continues to show that we are building more efficient data centers as we go along.
I want to come back to the efficiency a bit later in the podcast and hear more about it. Just one thing I'm wondering, these data centers or clusters, as you describe them, are they connected or everything is connected to everything? Give us an idea of how does it all work in real life?
So if you look at it, yes, there is some level of connection between the US and Frankfurt and Paris and other regions in certain aspects, whether it's through identity, access and management or what we call the control plane. So it's giving that ability for a customer to say, if I launch in, say, an infrastructure region in the US, if I go to Europe, how do I cascade or federate my information across as necessary? And so that's how we tend to think of that connectivity. Now, the European Sovereign Cloud, which we announced in January, is a fully standalone infrastructure region with its own identity and access management, its own control plane to control the flow of data. And that's because of that sovereign nature that we have put into that European sovereign cloud. So there are exceptions in some of our infrastructure regions and data centers.
And that's going to remain an important aspect, isn't it? You've just mentioned Saudi Arabia. So sovereignty of data and information, many countries around the world want that, isn't it?
Indeed, Atul. And if you think about sovereignty here, if you speak to different regulators or customers or governments, we find out that there are certain themes that resonate when they talk about sovereignty. One theme could be residency of the data, which is key in Saudi Arabia. The other theme is around zero operator access. That means no one in AWS can access the customer's data. And that's always a very key point. There is the aspect around resiliency and making sure that if there is failure, there should not be any failure. And we're talking about 5 nines or 6 nines type of reliability and resiliency. And there is also the aspect of being able to operate in a disconnected manner. And that's what the European Sovereign Cloud provides. So you've got different levels in that sense. Yes.
So now let's dig deep into the hottest topic right now, which is power demand, powering your data centers and everybody else's. Give our audience a flavor of how much electricity your data centers consume. How are you working with the power utilities? What kind of thinking you have in collaboration with them?
So my projection for power demand is that it will increase 47% from all sources over the next 25 years. And so when I say all sources, not just data centers, but from other sources where the world is going to be driving electrification and needing energy. And so for us as an organization, we are absolutely focused on the relationships with the energy companies or the utility companies to ensure that their customers are not adversely affected by our need for growing data centers in the region. If you look at the examples that we've announced and the work we've done in Indiana, where we signed a new agreement with NIPSCO. And NIPSCO is the Northern Indiana Power Services Company. In that arrangement of collaboration, Amazon will pay for all costs to power the Indiana data center we look to build out there. So we're talking 3,000 megawatts of electricity or electrical capacity coming from NIPSCO. We only need 2,400 megawatts, and the remaining 600 will be for what we call reliability, so to speak. Now, what's also interesting is that we will also pay to NIPSCO to use the existing transmission lines. And we believe that cost will be about $1 billion over the course of the agreement. That $1 billion will be passed back to NIPSCO's customers over the term of the agreement. So that's how we're thinking about collaboration and making sure customers are not affected by this investment or this move to grow more data centers.
Yeah, and clearly a very big issue, isn't it, for consumers and also politically. Now, we used to say a few years back, it's the gasoline cost, the petrol cost, and you could see it every day as you drove around. But now it's the electricity cost, which has been front and center in the minds of just the consumers like us, but also the politicians. So keeping those costs down is clearly very important for everybody.
Indeed, Atul. I would want to highlight that even as we look at that energy demand, there is an aspect of renewable energy that plays in this ecosystem. When you think about Amazon, which is, as a company, investing quite a fair bit in renewable energy. In fact, we say we are the highest or the number one purchaser of renewable energy globally since we started measuring in 2020. So 700 renewable projects globally across the world. We've got a portfolio of 4 of those in nuclear, and about 300 of those renewable projects are utility scale projects, and 11 of them utility scale battery projects across 28 countries. So that has to be combined with every other source of energy that we are looking at. And we are making those investments to enable the energy companies sanction those projects moving forward.
That's very important because you also have that longer term commitment around emissions. But what about natural gas? That's clearly going to be part of the mix, at least for the immediate future. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. Natural gas will continue to play in that mix, yes.
What is your thinking around nuclear? How do you see a role for nuclear, maybe further down the road?
Nuclear, I want to be bullish on nuclear. When we talk about some of our investments we've made to date, I'll highlight the one we've done with Talen Energy in Pennsylvania, where we have commissioned or signed a PPA for 1,920 megawatts of power from Talen, and that's going to run through 2042. But beyond that, we are also investing in other companies that are talking about developing the next generation SMR technology. X Energy is one of those that is doing that. And through the Climate Pledge Fund, we have invested $500 million in that project. We continue to be bullish, and we acknowledge that innovation and investment need to go together for us to look to develop renewable power as well as SMR, so small modular reactors moving forward here.
What I'm hearing from you is that renewables remain a key part of your mix. So let's go back to this idea of partnership with the power utilities. You gave the example you have in Indiana. What is maybe another example? Because clearly how you partner with utilities, not only to keep the cost down, but also keep the system stable, not have blackouts, or there is some talk occasionally about curtailment because the data center hyperscalers want all the electricity they can today, and maybe the consumers get left behind. So share with our audience how you're managing this pretty significant challenge. And the utilities work in a different time scale than hyperscalers like yourselves do in terms of speed of decision and everything else.
Indeed, Atul. And I do acknowledge that this will always be a very sensitive subject. As I say, from an Amazon perspective, an AWS perspective, our investments in data centers are matched with investments in energy, also making sure that the customers of the energy companies are not adversely affected. So you asked for a second example. I will give the example of Entergy. As we announced a $13 billion investment to build data centers in Mississippi, and at the same time, we backed it with a 650 megawatt renewable project, solar and wind in Mississippi. Now, the benefit of this is that Entergy, who had already earmarked $600 million to upgrade its grid system, is now increasing that amount by 50% and adding another $300 million to upgrade and modernize their grid systems with the objective of reducing power outages by 50% and still at zero cost to the customer. That's the way we want to continue to look at our investments in data center and make sure that we are giving back to the community on the back of the investments we are making. So that's one of them. Another one I would share is with Duke Energy. Duke Energy today operates the largest energy grid in the United States, and they are working with AWS to develop smart grid solutions, being able to understand and anticipate future energy demands, identify where they need to prioritize grid updates. And also, they have used our technology to completely reduce the forecasting time from months to hours. So there is a software component to that collaboration, as you asked me.
Yeah.
There is an investment aspect to that collaboration, and there is a corporate social responsibility aspect to everything we're doing here.
Yeah, that's great. So actually, a very nice segue to one of the most important discussions we are going to have at CERAWeek in Houston, which is around AI. Of course, AI data center is going to take all this energy, but what are they going to give us in return of that consumption of energy? And I'm interested in kind of your perspective on is AI will actually help us solve our demand challenges, right? Making the grid more efficient, or maybe designing more efficient chips or energy efficiency. Tell us about your thoughts on how do you get more out of the system to improve efficiency and so on.
If you think about grid modernization, we say that 70% plus of the grid in the US today is over 25 years old. Now, when we look at the rate of energy demand that is going to be amongst us, and people only think about the data centers, but electrification is across us.
You mentioned earlier the 47%. We are in the world of electrification beyond data centers, right around the world. So I think the audience, understands that. So a very good point to clarify. It's not just data center. There are many other demands for
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And so when you think about grid modernization, we do believe that grid enhancing technologies will play a key role to optimize the current grid and find pockets on where we can channel energy and electricity through without having to build new capacity, or allowing us time for new capacity to come on board. And so this is where AWS, with the AI technologies, helping these grid enhancing technologies to speed up the speed of simulation and understanding where those pockets exist. And we've seen very good results and good insights in companies we have been working with and who have been using AWS technology. So that's one, I would say. The other piece is really driving efficiency of the chips to make sure that those chips consume less power while delivering the same or even better performance than previous generation of chips. Last year, we announced the Trainium 3 Ultra servers, which will deliver 4x the performance per watt of energy compared to previous generations. And what does this bring for you then, or for us or the industry, is that ability to either do more compute with our existing capacity of data centers, or keep the compute the same and require less footprint as we go along. So these are the ways we are thinking about all of this. The cooling technology is going to be a very key aspect to that. And technologies are being developed even at the AWS side in terms of how we cool those chips and move forward there in that direction.
How do you think about the framework you use to say, here are things which we're going to do in AWS, here are things we're going to partner, whether it is more efficiency, more efficient chips, or designing a data center, or powering the data centers? Give us a high-level thinking of the company.
First of all, Atul, our mental model is that we are not going to develop everything ourselves. And we always acknowledge where our strengths lie and acknowledge where we believe industry and other adjacencies may have technology or are in the process of developing technology that we believe will be beneficial to AWS. So if we start with that mental model in place, it then means that we are open to any outreaches that come into us with technology companies that have something to offer, and that's, as you refer to, as our partners, or we continue to scout and see who has technology that we believe will be beneficial to AWS. And that's how we tend to look at that partner ecosystem. I gave the example of the $500 million investment in X Energy for next generation SMR. We continue to look at other companies that have cooling solutions in our data centers while we continue to develop our own chips or our own cooling technology that also helps drive efficiency in the data centers. The other piece of partnership, which folks or people don't talk about enough, is the relationship with policymakers and how we engage with them to make sure there is an understanding of where we as hyperscalers are going in the industry and how they speed up decision to be able to help the system or the entire organization move much faster. So that's high level how we tend to think about these partnerships. And that's what helped AWS continue to grow over the years.
So let's talk about the policymakers and the utilities. So what's your solution? You're a big hyperscaler. There are all these utilities you're working with, and also, of course, the policymakers. How do this chain, and there are other people involved, OEMs and so on, right? How do you get better collaboration, better decision, and perhaps faster decisions? What's your kind of solution for that?
For me, the first approach is intentionality on our part and acknowledging that they are key stakeholders in this engagement and in this process. What I like to do is, and we even at AWS, is be proactive in bringing them into the dialogue. We don't need to wait and sit on the side, on the fence for this, but really proactively reaching out to them, whether at the state level or at the national level or at the DC level, and even globally too, in other countries where we operate. It's not just only a US thing that we're talking about here. Being able to reach out to them proactively and share with them our perspective, either from a technology roadmap or an investment thesis that we may have, and hear from them how we can help the communities and what they need from us to be able to drive the investments that are needed to benefit everybody.
Outside of the US, you mentioned things you're doing in Europe and Saudi Arabia. Can you give our audience a bit of flavor about where do you see AWS growing around the world? Are there areas of focus for you, or is it very broad?
I would say it's very broad, and we will look for the opportunity where there is a large transformation. In fact, our thesis is that we want to help transform economies, and that's how we think about infra expansion or infra region expansion globally. Now, last year, I would say we doubled down quite a bit in ASEAN and Asia. We launched new regions in Taiwan and Thailand. In 2024, we launched Malaysia. And so every region has a perspective. I talked about the European sovereign cloud we launched in Europe. Chile is going to be coming on board later this year. So every geographical region internationally outside of the US will have focus, I would say, from our perspective, and we'll make that investment where it makes sense with the need to transform those economies.
What do you look for when you decide we're going to go into Chile or into Saudi? Are there certain things like a checklist you have?
Yes, we look at the opportunity that presents itself. How are we going to uplift the digital transformation goal of that country? That's the first thing we look at. And we work very closely with policymakers in those countries, thinking through how can they make it interesting and have AWS come into those countries. So we will talk about potential incentives that would help us drive the right level of investment to come into those countries. The other piece is, of course, we will need to have the discussion around energy, power, and what's available for us to work with in the country here. But at the end of the day, it's really about developing the population. How do we uplift the digital literacy level of those countries and help them develop a startup economy and really use the advantage and the benefits that the cloud brings to those economies?
Yeah, a very big opportunity, clearly. So last question. You're coming to CERAWeek. Thank you for that. What kind of conversations are you planning to have while you are in Houston in a few weeks?
It's really about bridging the gap between AI, the energy demand, and grid capacity. I am of the opinion that we've had a lot of dialogue over the last couple of years on this topic, and it's really time for action. And I believe industry is ready for this. We are going to be really diving deep into how we're bridging the gap. And I've talked about some of the things on grid modernization, grid enhancement, what AI is going to bring to bear in this sense as a hyperscaler. And I understand I have a great set of panelists. And so I am looking forward to the discussion and the dialogue at all.
Yeah, of course, not only the panel, but all the networking and the private dialogues you and your colleagues from AWS will have. Thank you very much for joining us for this podcast. We look forward to seeing you in Houston in a few weeks.
Sure.
Good luck until then.
Thank you very much, Atul. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on the CERAWeek podcast. To stay connected with the ideas driving change across energy and technology, subscribe, share, and rate this episode. It helps us get the word out. Let's continue having impactful conversations. I'm Atul Arya. Until the next time.
The CERAWeek podcast with Atul Arya is brought to you by CERAWeek, the world's premier energy conference. Be part of the conversations moving the world of energy forward. March 23rd through 27th, 2026 in Houston. Discover more at CERAWeek.com.